Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Secrets for an Inspirational Life. I hope that everything and everyone is okay and that this finds you in a pleasant and a good mood today. In today's episode, I have the privilege to have a special guest, and it's Andy Bromley on the show. He's the marketing manager at Ingram Content Group, and he's also the head of marketing for Europe, Asia, Australia, and the United Kingdom. He's also part of the IngramSpark group, and he helps indie authors get their print books out through the Ingram network. And I have to say that Andy has been a real source of inspiration and help for me. And it's really because of him and all his wonderful advice that I actually started this podcast. So anyone who's interested in publishing a book, this is going to be absolutely a treasure because Andy is going to give some invaluable advice. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Andy. Hi, Andy.
Oh, hi, Mimi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, and thank you for the very kind introduction.
Oh, it's well deserved, well deserved. How have you been?
We've been, really busy, very busy as you'd expect. There's been busy for different reasons in the last few weeks with what's going on in the world. But the main thing is that keeping the supply chain of books open. A lot of the traditional wholesalers in the market have had real challenges getting books out. So with I guess we'll talk later, with us offering more digital solutions with print on demand, we've been able to keep the business going, which means that we've been having conversations with people and publishers new to us that are using us as a way of keeping their content into the supply chain. So, you know, the larger retailers like Amazon and the Book Depository can still buy their books. So yeah, it's been really busy.
So you are an expert, as I said, in your field, and if you would like to share a little bit about what you do and your company, because I'm sure so many people out there will be so interested in this.
Yeah, so I mean, to cut a long story short, Ingram has been involved in the distribution of books for many years. Going back to the very early 60s, it was founded by the Ingram family. It's still with Ingram today, so it's remained up the course through that time. And really, the company pioneered a technology that's not always known, but it's becoming far more known today, called print on demand, where essentially it allows publishers and individual authors to write a book or to create a book, hold it within our system, and we can sell it to Waterstones or Amazon or any retailer really that would buy from us. And then we print it on demand. We take the fee for printing the book, and we take the retail price that the publisher or the author sets, and then we return what's left over back to the publisher or the author. And this technology although it's been around for quite a while, it's becoming far more common for publishers to use it. Because the traditional model would be a publisher having to print, anything up to like 5,000 copies of a book, put them in warehouses, then try and sell them to retailers. And if they can't sell them for whatever reason, then many publishers would have to pulp and get rid of the stock. And then you've tied all your money up into bulk inventory because you've got them ready, waiting for customers. And really, the model that IngramSpark and Ingram pioneered was this ability to sell books without the need to hold, hundreds or in some cases thousands of books, in a warehouse. So we do printed books and ebooks, there are other services that authors can explore, such as audiobooks are becoming very, very popular now, and a really strong area in the business of growth is audiobooks. So, for the individual, what we would call the authorpreneur,
Mm-hmm.
their options are so much broader than they would have been 20, 25 years ago, where you had to get a deal with a big publishing house, and if you couldn't get a contract, then you couldn't get published. But in today's world, authors don't need necessarily to go through a middleman publisher; they can do it themselves. So anyone who's got a story to share has that opportunity now to do so.
So it's a greater freedom for people now, especially authors or anyone really who would like, as you say, to self-publish their story. So how do they go about doing that, Andy?
So there's various routes to doing it. One of the organisations that I always recommend for people who are new to this is a non-profit association called the Alliance of Independent Authors.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a membership fee for that, but as I said, it's a non-profit association, and they will really help kind of authors who are new to the industry to kind of understand some of the steps, and they have like a Facebook forum where you can ask for advice. And the main thing is not so much producing the book, because we have tools, for example, to help authors do that in IngramSpark, but it's more understanding the industry, how the market works, and the marketing actually is a really challenging bit for new authors to kind of get around. So, of course, people can just upload their book if they feel they've got a story, but I think sometimes it's worth spending a few months learning about the industry, and an organisation like Ally is a great place to start, because that will help you understand all your different kind of options available, and the learning will be so much more accessible to and quick to kind of digest in an organisation that kind of has been set up for that purpose than scouring the internet to try and find information, because there is a little bit of jargon to kind of understand, but it's not too difficult. But actually, by understanding it first, that helps often in the long term of being a successful author, if that's kind of one of the things that people want to pursue.
And marketing is something obviously that's important, and it's something that you are an expert in. What sort of things should people look to do when they're researching? Once they've written their book, for example, what's the next step for them?
Yeah, so to some degree, a lot the marketing will be dependent on the type of book that you're writing. So obviously, if it's like an academic and professional book, in a specialist area, that's going to require a different approach than if it's a trade book or a children's book. But the general rule of thumb, and I think this is sometimes where authors sometimes get unstuck at the beginning, is they often think about the retailer, so they'll think about what do Waterstones or what do Amazon care about. And the really successful to understand that actually, in most cases, a retailer is only often reacting to the demand of the customer. So the authors that tend to do well are the ones that really generate their marketing in a way that connects with the end reader. So not the person who might be buying the book, which could be, Amazon, for example, but ultimately who is going to be the end customer, who's going to be the reader. So, some stories of some success stories I know would be, we had an author who did poetry, and he used Instagram and he used social media as a way of giving away individual poems and getting his name shared and engaged across the social media community. But then people have the opportunity to buy the book once they, got to know the author and they got to appreciate his poems because they wanted to read more of his poems, and obviously that led to an opportunity for him to sell the book. So what I would say for most successful authors, one of the things they have in common is they know that sometimes you have to give things away in order to attract people in. Because if you're new to the industry, if you're a new author and you haven't got a brand name, so you're not, I don't know, David Williams or J.K. Rowling, then you have to understand that there has to be some means or mechanism of people finding you and understanding who you are. So a lot of the successful authors will run, free YouTube, or they might even give away chapters of their book. In some cases, they might give away their first book as a way of hooking people in, and then people buy in the second book. Now, if you spent years writing the first book, that could be a daunting thing, but you don't necessarily have to give the book away. You could be giving chapters away. You could be doing readings online through YouTube. You could have a podcast like Mimi you're doing today. You could, for example, do if you don't always have to think globally. It could be that if you've written a children's book, you might offer to do a reading in the primary school or in the local library, or in some cases the local bookstore if they've got an active community and not all bookstores are as engaging with these ideas as others, but many would love the fact that an author could do a reading in the local library or in the local bookstore or in the local school. So often think kind of laterally and almost ultimately you want to sell if it's a physical book or an audio book or an ebook. But often, if you're not known, it requires you to give something out, like give a reason for people to engage with you. And often that requires some kind of what's known in the industry as a freemium model, where some of the things that you do, you don't charge for. So that could be a YouTube channel, for example. But as people learn about who you are and are attracted by the content that you produce, then there will always be people who want to know more and are willing to pay to learn more about you as an author, in your venture. But a lot of it is down to the types of content that you're creating. So we know, for example, in children's books, it's still very much a print paradigm. Most publishers still make most of their money through the printed book, for example, where like a lot of romance and thrillers are much more moving towards ebooks as a form of delivery. So, and equally, the kind of audience that might want thriller books might be looking in different places than those that want a children's book. And equally, we've had really successful authors who their business model is doing school visits if they're a children's author, and doing talks and almost mini productions of their book with the children. But they know, by doing that, they are marketing their personal brand to that school, and the parents would often purchase the book either before the author would visit the school or after. But that's just one example You have to. Almost if anyone's looking at what the best method is to look at some of the more successful people in your genre and look at what they're doing to get some ideas of where you might want to start.
So it's a lot of research, and you have to have an open mind and look to, as you say, other people, what they are doing. It's not about, I have a lot of people say to me, well, you've written books and I've got to write a book, but I've only made £1 on Amazon, and mostly they're in it for the money. But it's not all about that, is it, Andy? It's not as simple as that. I write a book, I put it on Amazon, or I come to Ingrams and we make lots of money. But people seem to think that selling books is a huge profit straight away.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think really that the successful authors, really successful authors, tend to fall in. They tend to have two things in common. The first one is they play the long game, if you like. So they're not ultimately focused on making the short term money from, I don't know, selling 10,000 copies in 6 months, because that rarely happens. What they do is they'll build their audience through different avenues, whether that's social, whether that's Facebook, through YouTube, through podcasts, through visiting local communities to get their name out. So that's often content that they're producing with no direct financial return. But what they're doing is effectively building and finding their community. They're finding their audience. So once you've found your audience, then it's a lot easier to monetize, to offer services like the book or the audio book or the ebook, or in some cases, consultations or which they would be willing to pay for. But you would never have the opportunity if you didn't build that audience or engagement first. The second thing a lot of the really successful authors do that are independently published, and the top 1%, are they don't think in terms of one thing. They'll have multiple income streams. So if anyone wants to Google the name Joanna Penn, for example, Joanna Penn is a perfect example of this.
She has so many wonderful things, doesn't she, online?
She does, yeah. So she, as a model, she's a great example. So she'll have a books for helping authors to be successful in their publishing. She'll also have a different pen name for a kind of fiction work, and then she'll also maybe do YouTube videos of services that help publishers. But she'll often have a link, and if you click on that link, that whatever service that she's promoting or talking about, she's very upfront at the beginning. She'll say, I am an affiliate of this organisation, and then that organisation will pay her a percentage of customers who click on that link.
For example, what organisation would that be, for example?
So a good example would be, I followed Joanna Penn quite recently, actually. I was looking at building a publishing website. So she was talking about a hosting service called Bluehost. I think it's Bluehost, which is a way of hosting your web content. So many companies provide these services, but she was talking about this one company that she uses herself, and she was very upfront that she has an affiliate to this organisation. So if you do want to use their services, click on her link below, and she gets paid a percentage. So with Joanna as one example, she'll make revenue from selling her books. She'll make revenue from selling maybe her audio books or her ebooks. She'll make revenue from her YouTube channel, because it may be that she'll talk about a service that she's used, and she can talk about with some authority, and then people who want to take that service on, then if they click on the link, she'll get a certain amount. And then she does in this particular example, because every author is going to be different, she usually she does public speaking. So because she's so well known now in the industry for helping authors when it comes to things like publishing events. Some people will pay her to talk for an hour on how to be a successful author, for example. So she's a really good example, because if you look at her portfolio of income, she's not relying on one source. She's not relying on all the books that she sells on Amazon, because that's only one portion of what she makes. There'll be other areas like that she'll make, So I guess what the reason why this is important is it kind of illustrates the breadth of what a successful author looks like. They often don't look at just one area like printed book sales. They'll look at their whole holistic brand that they could represent, and the kind of things that they can do to engage with their audience. And that's really the key thing. And that's initially probably not where you would make any financial gain. But once you've got an audience that actually wants to listen to what you say, even if they're not paying to do so, then there'll always be a percentage of people who will pay for some additional information or a new way of delivering the information. So Joanna Penn's a good example. She talks very openly and freely about how to market a book on YouTube. You can just watch the YouTube videos and you can probably get, 50-70% of the value just by watching the YouTube videos, not paying anything. But, like, for example, I bought her book, and I'm in marketing, and she wrote a book on how to market books. I thought, well, I could learn something.
Yes.
And I bought the book. Now, it might be only 10% more in the book than maybe what I could have achieved by just watching the YouTube videos. But that's not the point. And the point is that there'll be people like myself, in this case, will always pay to have the information either delivered in a different way or, in some cases, with new information. So any author would always say, look, the main thing, the hardest thing, but the thing that shouldn't really cost you any money is do things for free, like this idea of freemium. So giving your content away, whether it's doing a YouTube video, whether it's, whatever it is, build your audience first. And then once you've got the audience, there'll always be a small percentage that will pay for things that are related to what you're talking about or what you're involved in. And it could be that you're delivering similar content in a book format or in an audio book format, or it could be that you offer consultation services if you're in the professional services sector. So, for example, we've got authors that don't really make the money from the book. They might write a book about a problem that they're solving, and then they sell their consultation for what that is. An extreme example would be one that we found a few years ago. A guy in Los Angeles. He was the person that people go to if they want to set up a plastic surgery.
Right.
So
okay.
he wrote a book on how to launch a successful plastic surgery practice in Los Angeles.
Why not?
Now his particular book with us cost $10,000, and people bought, and some people did buy the book. Now it wasn't a bestseller, but it shows you that he in this particular example, he was an expert in a very, very lucrative but a small niche, and because he knew this niche really well, he could charge a very high premium for what he was delivering. Now, obviously, most people wouldn't be charging $10,000 for their book, But it's an example of if you know your market and you know your market well, and there's not many people who do.
Absolutely, yes.
Then you can charge a premium for the knowledge that you can pass on to, or the problem that you're trying to solve. So really, I mean, if you're a non-trade publisher, I would frame it as, okay, what problem are you trying to solve for people? In this case, the problem was, I'm a plastic surgeon and I want to be a successful one. And this guy can help me, and this is how much I would have to pay to get that knowledge. Now, that's an extreme example, but...
and did he sell many of those books, Andy?
He did, but I think with his model, really, what he was doing was trying to get his model was really that people would pay the $10,000 for his concert, for his time. And his book went with his time. He put such a high premium on the book because of the knowledge that he was able to give to his clients. Now, obviously, if you're a children's author, it's not so much a problem, but the problem could be you have a really, not the problem, but the issue is to entertain a child or through a story. So, of course, there's lots of authors who've got stories to children. So then the idea is, what makes your book stand out? So we met a really inspirational author at a book fair in Germany. I went to the Frankfurt Book Fair, and
because you travel a lot, don't you, Andy?
A fair bit. I mean, we not too much, but it was at the Frankfurt Book Fair. And I met an African-American woman who really said that the problem she found was that there's no really good stories for black children that are inspirational. So she wrote one. So she identified a problem. She said, well, the market isn't catering for positive role models for black African-American children or African children, and therefore I'm going to create a book that is an inspirational story for African American children. And she was very successful because she saw that there was a problem that she could solve it.
It is an interesting point, because I was talking to someone a few years ago about this niche market that you talk about, and I remember them saying to me that they knew somebody who had written a book about cutting vinyl for kitchen floors and for bathrooms, and his book actually outsold many of the books that they were, it was a publisher that they had on their books. So it is about finding your niche and what you can do to help people, but also it doesn't stop there, does it? It has to encompass you as an author, your skills as an author, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. It's what is it that you're trying to service, you're trying to provide, or what problem are you trying to solve, and what makes your solution different?
Unique. Unique.
Yeah,
I
what
suppose.
makes you unique? So I'm thinking of when I was at Frankfurt. I met. I didn't actually meet the lady herself. She was in America, but I met her son, and he was telling me that his mother has written a book about being a refugee in the war because she was caught up in Germany in the World War II, and she still is. She's German. She's Jewish, which obviously during the war was a fairly precarious time. So her whole story was about her time during the 1930s as a Jew in Germany. And he was telling me how he was getting the book set up as an audio, as an ebook. That was an ebook because he had the printed book. Because she used to do visits to schools in America, and he said that she'd been really successful because schools want to book her because to have a real historical person talking about this experience during World War II really fascinated the children.
Mm-hmm.
But his issue was that she was now I think she was in her late 80s, or she might even be in her 90s, because I think she was a child during the war. And she's obviously, her mobility wasn't what it was 20 years ago, so he was looking at different ways of getting the book out into the market, which is why I happened to speak to him. And my instant response was, has she got an audio book? And he went, no. And I said, you need to get her to record an audio book, because that needs to be recorded as a moment in history. Now we hope, I'm sure we all hope that she lives for many, many years to come, but in 20 years' time, there's not going to be that many people alive that was alive in the 1930s. So, that's an example of somebody who had a story to tell, who was in a very, obviously in this case, an unfortunate situation, being, a Jew in Germany in the 1950s. But that story is inspirational to people for many other reasons. And so I guess the point is, what made this woman inspirational, apart from that she's, a very good author, is that she was in tragic circumstances, that she was able to kind of tell a inspirational story. And there'll be authors listening, or would-be or potential authors wanting to listen to this podcast, that may know of a situation they've been in, and they can write an inspirational story. Or it could be that you've identified a problem, or it's something you're not happy with. So in the example of this African American lady, she was she was unhappy that African American children weren't being represented in children's books in a positive light. So she wrote the book. She fixed the problem as she saw it. So sometimes it's a case of having an inspirational story. In some cases, it could be you identify a problem that's not being addressed or catered for in the market, and therefore you've got the solution to it.
Andy, you must meet a lot of inspirational people, I would guess. Who inspires you, or what inspires you as a person?
I think so. I mean, you mentioned IngramSpark, which is obviously a part of our business that's catered more around authors. I think some of the authors that we've met and some I've spoken about are kind of the more inspirational people I've met. I mean, a really good example of I think his name is Dominic Selwood, or Selwood, I think it is. He writes for the Daily Telegraph, and we met him in London a few years ago, and he wrote a trilogy about, it's a bit like a Dan Brown type book. The issue for the publishers is the book was 700 pages long, and they said, we want to sign you as an author, we want you on our books, we want you to be an author of our publishing house, but we want the book to be half the size of what it is today. It needs to be 350 pages. And he refused, so he turned down the contract, and he became self-published, and very, very successful. I mean, the book was called The Sword of Moses, I think it was called. It was an e-book that we did, and it was in the bestsellers for months and months and months. I think it was 6 months or more. I kept saying it in the top 10 bestsellers, because he really, really, really believed strongly and passionately that not to compromise. He just believed in it so much that he turned down a contract with a publisher who would have probably paid him a handsome fee for the book.
Yes.
But he had to compromise. He had to compromise his artistic freedom. And he refused to do that and did it himself and became a success. So I get inspired by those kind of people who really, really believe in what they have to say and what they do, and they make sacrifices in order to achieve it. So in this case, this individual author went from turning down a lucrative publishing deal because he refused to compromise his artistic freedom, but he still made it work. And people like Joanna Penn, Joanna's really quite an inspirational author and speaker, actually. And she was telling me, I don't think she was telling the audience. I happened to be at one of her seminars, and she was saying that, I think she lost her job in 2008 in the financial crash, and she promised herself that from that day on she'll never rely on a salary from an employer, and she's going to do it herself. And she's a real inspiration, because from 2008 to where she is today, she's a very, very successful, what she would describe as an authorpreneur.
So what is an authorpreneur? You've mentioned that a couple of times, Andy. What is that?
Well, I think people who describe themselves as an authorpreneur, obviously the preneur bit is a bit like the entrepreneur, but they see their brand, themselves as the brand, really, like Joanna Penn is. In many cases, I think is a brand in herself, and they don't restrict themselves to one thing. So that's really what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Was that it's very easy for authors just to think about the book, the physical book, being in a bookshop in Waterstones or in their local bookstore. But really, those that are successful think far more broadly than that, and they realise that actually it's not that individual one store that is going to make the difference. It's the whole kind of collective things that individual can do to support their business. So, in Joanna Penn's case, she is the brand. She is effectively the business, but she's got multiple ways of driving that business. It could be through a YouTube engagement, or audio books, or e-books, or printed books, or public speaking. So she has probably 6-7 different ways monetizing her brand, which is her. And I think most authors who really are successful, especially if they're independently published, need to really kind of think of themselves as the business, as the brand, and think very laterally about how that brand can work in the market in which they're catering for. And there's no one set rule. It's not like everyone who should do a YouTube video or everyone shouldn't do an audiobook. Really, by looking at some of the really successful people in the genres that you're interested in, and even in some cases, areas outside your genres, because you can borrow things from different genres,
different models.
Different models. There might be a person following a model in a totally different area than what you're pursuing or what you're writing in, but the model would fit with what you're doing. So, I guess the point is don't restrict your thinking to a single format or a single type or a single way of making income, especially if you're wanting to work to the point where you it's your main source of income and you don't rely on a paycheck from an employer, like most of us, and me included.
Yes.
Then you do need to think more laterally about how you generate that income, because the broader your base, then the more robust your business is, essentially.
As you always say to me, cast your net far and wide. And I always remember those words from you. And it is very good advice. It's something that always stays in my mind. And is this, all of this that authors have to do that are self-published, if, for example, they were traditionally published, is that something that the publisher would take care of? Is this only for people that are going to self-publish their book? Is this something as an author in general should be looking at, the advice that you have given?
I almost certainly it applies to both. I mean, increasingly, publishers who sign authors now are increasingly looking at what their social media presence and value is. It's almost being measured, if not more so, than the content, because the idea that the idea that some authors had, or maybe still have, that you write the manuscript, you send it to the publisher, and then they take care of everything else, is so divorced from reality these days.
Yes,
I mean, unless you are David Walliams or the J.K. Rowlings of the world, then you're not going to be at the top of the marketing budget or the agenda item in that publishing house. So often the author drives the business, and the more successful you are in that area, the less relevant a traditional publisher is to you, but the more they want you. So it's kind of that dichotomy is the more the more the publisher wants you, the less you need them. Because they want you because of your value presence, and it's usually because you've got a large kind of social media following. Or if you look at like a lot of the top authors in the last kind of 5-10 years in the charts, have often have been from celebrities, people like David Walliams or the chef Jamie Oliver, and that's because they've built the brand before they've even written the book. So they're a publisher's dream because the brand has already been built. But if you can build your own brand on a micro level, I'm talking about being the next David Walliams, although if you can achieve that, then more power to you.
Yes.
But if you can build your brand in your niche or in the area that you're aspiring to be, then publishers will want to sign you as an author. But you may find, in the case of like Dominic Selwood with his Sword of Moses book, you may decide that you don't want them.
That's right. That's right. You don't need them.
It's a dual. It's often the authors that think of publishers as the way of fixing all their problems beyond writing the book. I mean, the biggest challenge an author faces is often, not always, and this is where it's difficult. Often the authors that like writing are usually quite introvert personality-wise. They tend, not all, and this is just a stereotype, but they're often then the ones that struggle the most with the marketing. So the ones that are really successful tend to be the ones that might know that they're introverts, but they can be extroverts where they need to be. And Joanna Penny, I can say this because I've heard her say it, that she would say that if anyone heard her speak at an event, you would not think that she's an introvert. You would think she's an extrovert. She's an extremely good speaker. She comes across very well, very articulate. But she, as a type, she would describe herself as an introvert. But she knows that she has to wear many hats when she's running her entrepreneurial, authorpreneur business. And one of them is to wear the extrovert hat when you need to.
It's a necessity, isn't it, Andy? Because I know artists and authors usually are the ones who are the most artistic and literate in that way, but they have a deep fear of putting themselves out there and marketing themselves.
Yeah. And really, marketing can sometimes come across as some kind of like a dirty word that people are embarrassed to talk about publicly. But really, when you talk about marketing, it's just the methods of finding your audience. Because if you've got something that people want to hear, it's finding the right methods to get them to hear it. And then it's kind of working out in your business plan what things you need to do in order to make that audience, pay for things like the printed book, because obviously there's a cost to you. There's a cost for you to produce the book. There's a cost in your time to create your content. So it's not unreasonable to expect people to pay, a certain amount of money to read your ebooks or to listen to your audio book. Or, some authors will have a YouTube channel, but they'll have a Patreon account for those that really want to have unique content. People will pay for that, and there's nothing wrong with that. And marketing is really just like, what I'm doing here today. To some degree, I'm talking about IngramSpark, but I'm talking more broadly. But by doing that, people who've never heard of IngramSpark may think, well, I'll look them up. And then that's people who may not have engaged with IngramSpark. But it's the same for anything. If you want to become known in your area, you need to have a way of communicating with your audience. And really, marketing is just that. It's just finding the methods that connect your content or your creative ideas or your problem, your solution to the problem that you're trying to solve into the hands or the ears or the eyes of the people that you think would want to hear that message. And the great thing about social media is you can do that very inexpensively. You can push out a YouTube video for next to nothing really, and then that's a test. If you can't get the audience, then go back to your message. Are you doing something wrong? Is there an audience for it? Maybe there is, but you need to tweak it a little bit, and you learn from that kind of experience on whether actually there's a market for it. And it's good to know that now, while you're doing things that are relatively inexpensive, than to do it later when you've invested, thousands of pounds in marketing. So you can do lots of social media, paid ads, for example, on Facebook and things like that. But really, I would test the market with your free content first.
To dip your foot in the water a little bit.
Yeah, and learn from that, and then only then spend money when you feel you've got something to gain from it. I mean, and everybody has different budgets. I mean, there's some people, on a publishing event that I attended a few years ago, I went to I can't remember the establishment. It was from the price of the beer and wine. It was a very expensive one, and I met a guy there who was a financial investor in the city, and he clearly, money from the book was not his motivation. And he wrote a book about, I can't remember what the book was about. I think it was a thriller or it was a fiction book of some sort. His motivation was not making money from the book. He just wanted to write a book. So, for that individual, spending a few £1,000s on marketing, a paid advert, is fine. He can absorb that expenditure. Most people are not in that position. So it's kind of tailoring it to your needs and your budget, because everyone's different.
And your circumstance, I suppose.
And your circumstances and what you're trying to achieve from it. I mean, this individual, I could be wrong, but I didn't get the impression that he measured the success from the money he got back. I think he would probably have measured his success from the people, how many people read it, and or how many people engage with his blog, or whichever it is.
Now, Andy, you are successful in your career. I know we talked about this, and I know you were doing an MBA, and you've just finished an MBA, haven't you?
I have, yeah, thankfully.
Yes, and what was that in?
So it was a general. It's a general master's in business administration. So it's basically, when I went to university years and years ago, I didn't do a business degree. It was one of the more broader social sciences, and it was just a grounding in some of the fundamentals of business organisation, finance, and marketing, which I've been doing for some years. But yeah, I mean, like most people, you study subjects that you might not be passionate about, but actually, from a career perspective,
it helps.
It helps, and actually translating that to authorpreneurs, you'll find actually you'll come across things that you're stuck on. Like how do you set up a Patreon account, or how do you do a YouTube video? And there's an abundance of free material on YouTube and things that will teach you how to do it. So, what I would say is become a student if you want to be an author. And that's why I recommend joining an organisation like the Alliance of Independent Authors. But
they're an excellent organisation. I know them, and they are very good.
But, yeah, just be prepared to learn, because there'll be things that you come across that you won't know how to do it. But there will be a video somewhere, or a blog, or a bit of advice from another member of Ally that will help you get round it. And that might take a few weeks. It may take a few months if it's a really difficult skill that you have to overcome. But just approach it like you're a student again, and you will need to learn new things as you venture into new areas.
Thank you, Andy. And, drawing this episode, it's so wonderful. And, thank you so much for coming on. It's really such a source of information, as I said, and treasure. And what advice, finishing off, what advice would you give to people out there that's helped you in your life?
Yeah, I just think the main thing is, that's a good question. I think what the answer should be. I think, think about what it is you want to do. It may not be writing a book, and that's fine. But the main thing, I think, is just think as broadly and as widely as possible. Often when we're developing ideas in the working environment, what I often find is try not to go in with any preconceptions. So start with a blank piece of paper and invite people who think differently to you, because it will bring ideas that you wouldn't naturally come across. So we've all got different types. Some people are more logically minded, some people are more...
Yes, that's right.
...kind of artistic minded. But, one of the things I found from doing my course when we do a lot of project work is you find that what I found really easy, somebody found really difficult, and what I found really difficult, other people found really easy.
Yeah.
So, if you're not in a working environment, maybe invite family and friends and go, this is a lot. And you could have it as a social, maybe invite people and bribe them with some nibbles and drinks and say, look, I've got an idea, I don't know whether it's going to go.
Yeah.
Let's get a blank piece of paper, I'm just going to write things down and give me your ideas. And then you'll get an ideas board, and then you can decide on whether you want to pursue that thing. It might be, it might not be a book, maybe in a different area of artistic expression. It could be writing a song. It could be learning how to play a guitar. It could be something that doesn't generate monetary reward, and that is fine. But invite other people in on your ideas, and you'll probably find that the ideas has got much more breadth to it than you would do if you just thought of it individually on your own.
So we always have to see that there's always something new to learn. And although people think sometimes, we can be experts in a subject, but we can all, life's a journey about learning, and there's so many people that can teach us and we can teach them. And that's one of the beautiful things about, as you said, inviting people into your circle, so to speak.
Yeah, Yeah, I think so. And I think the other thing is don't, and it's harder, and it's very hard for me to follow my own advice, but don't be afraid to make mistakes and ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen?
Yes.
I mean, clearly don't invest £10,000 into something if you haven't got £10,000.
Yes. Good advice.
Yeah.
Yes.
But if it's not a huge financial commitment, and you're trying something that could go wrong, and ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? So you might think you've got an idea to write a children's book, and maybe you don't sell lots of copies. What's the worst that's happened? You've not sold lots of copies. I mean, providing you haven't remortgaged the house to spend on a 6-figure advertising campaign, then you're fine. You've just done something that very few people would have ever done. You've written a book, and it's not had the overnight success that you wanted to, but it may be that it leads to something else that does become a success. So
brilliant advice. Brilliant.
Yeah, often you find I find with people who've really made it, it's not their first attempt. It's often like their 6th or 7th or 8th.
Yes, keep trying.
And all the other things failed, but they just kept going. And that's really the difference between success and failure, is that these really exceptional 1%, I often find they just keep going and they don't give up. And that tends to be the thing that makes them stand out as exceptional, not the fact that they might have an exceptional skill, other than that skill being they just don't give up.
Thank you very much, Andy. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for everything. And I can safely say that you are an expert who has helped many people, including myself. And if people want to look, because we're running out of time, all they have to do is to go onto the Ingram site, do they?
Yeah, they can. Yeah, look at IngramSpark. Have a look at some of the features. Again, we a non-profit organisation like the Alliance of Independent Authors. They can give you independent advice as well. They can recommend other services, so you can compare and contrast.
Brilliant.
That with what So again, think broadly, and we welcome anybody who wants to be a customer of IngramSpark, but I would encourage everyone to look broadly at a range of different things. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andy, and I hope to see you and speak to you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Mimi.
Thank you
very much.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Andy Bromley, a source of information and a fountain of knowledge. Wonderful. So I hope that he has inspired you to write that story. Dreams are there for the taking. Thank you very much to everybody who has joined us today. And I want to wish you luck and hope in pursuing those deep dreams that, you think you can't achieve. But you know what? You can. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope to see you in the next show. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Secrets for an Inspirational Life, brought to you by your host, Mimi Novic. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast, and see you in the next episode. For more information about Mimi Novic and her books, music, and inspirational work, take a look at her website, www.miminovic.co.uk.